I'm Kara Infante, and this is Bookish Flights. In each episode, I chat with one bookish guest as we take some time to sample and savor the pairing recommendations from their bookish flight. We hope to give you suggestions to cultivate your TBR list and nurture your leisure time through books. In today's episode, I am chatting with Ashley Terpstra. Ashley and I met while living overseas. We were always handing books back and forth amongst one another when we lived near each other, since books in English weren't the easiest to just go to the store and get. Even though the distance separates us now, we still virtually do the same. Ashley is currently taking classes to receive her reading specialist endorsement, so has lots of extra insight to share with us today. I recently did a post asking what the best book of 2022 was, and so many times my friends mentioned Kristin Hannah. So when Ashley and I chatted about doing our first ever vertical book flight to take a peek at an author's backlist, we knew it had to be Kristin Hannah. Thank you so much, Ashley, for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here with you.
Yay! Well, let's start how we do around here with you telling us a little bit about your reading life.
I've always considered myself an avid reader, and I've always loved reading. And when I think back to how it began, what comes to mind is just falling in love with the Little House on the Prairie series by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I think partly because I was around the same age as Laura when I read the books, but also because my mom gave them to me as Christmas gifts and birthday gifts, and she would write my name and the date inside the cover. And then she kept all the books so that I was able to pass them down to my oldest daughter, and then I was able to share them with her.
I love that.
And then, when I think back to my life, I think I can picture a book that stands out in each period of my life. I remember in middle school loving the Babysitter Club books, and my best friend Sarah and I passing those back and forth and wanting to create our own babysitter club. And then, since my husband, a funny story from college when we had first met and were hanging out was I was hanging out in his room and saw he had a poster of Jack Kerouac's book On the Road.
Okay.
And I remember thinking, uh-oh, I liked this guy and thought he was cool, but now I see he has one of my favorite books as a poster. So, now I'm in trouble. That must mean something.
Yeah, I haven't read that book. That might be one I'll have to pick up. I've definitely seen it for sure.
Yeah. I wouldn't recommend it at this stage in our life. I feel like it's me more of an early young adult, early adolescence, but I mean, I'm never going to tell someone not to read a book. It's definitely one of those classic books you'll hear about throughout your life, I think.
All right. So, and then I know you're taking courses right now towards your reading specialist endorsement. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So I feel so fortunate that I was able to translate my passion of reading into my professional life, especially as a mom. I know that is a treasured time of reading with my kids, each one of my 3 kids, and sharing my love of books with them. But as a teacher, I always enjoyed that aspect, that other side of the coin of watching kids learn to read and helping them along their own path of independent reading. And so I'm currently switching gears. I was a first grade teacher for many years before having kids, but now I am getting that reading specialist endorsement that I know your other guest Liliana has. And so and primarily because of the age of my kids, really interested in those early and pre-reading stages and tips, and then like elementary as well. But I'm always that person. I want to share a tip. I want to help kids and inspire them to find a book that they love and just share that magic with everyone.
Yeah, I love this about you because I know you've sent some tips along my way as well. Like, hey, I just learned about this. You should check it out for your kids. And so it's great that you share that. Would you be willing to share some tips with our guests?
I would love to. Yes. And I think it's just one of those nuggets that maybe everyone knows it's important to read to kids, but not necessarily why are those important tips along the way. Obviously read,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the amazing benefits that happens when you're reading with your kids is that you're actually building their vocabulary. A large vocabulary will lead to later success in their reading comprehension. So a really cool statistic is that books contain 50% more rare words than just conversation alone.
Wow.
And so a tip for caretakers or parents when they're reading with their children is like when you come across a fun word or a new word, stop and say, "Oh, did you hear that interesting word?" Say it's the word peculiar or discombobulated, and repeat the word, and then just point it out and talk about what it means because you're actually building that vocabulary in their brain.
Yeah, I actually remember at one point, we both have husbands named Eric, but my husband, I said a word to him one time and he's like, "That's not how you say that." And I think I actually probably had learned to read it in a book in my own mind. So that was
Mm-hmm.
what I had thought it sounded like. So then I like said it out to the world. Thankfully it was him, so it's like my comfort zone, but he was like, "That's not how you say that." And I
Right?
remember just having this epiphany of like, really? I think for years I've thought that's how you said it.
Right. And that's an important skill too, because you're actually building that how to pronounce it. And then when they come across it in a text, they'll know the word.
Yeah.
Another really easy one that's quick and is important for our pre-reading aged kiddos is rhyming. It's a crucial element in getting them to recognize that words are made of individual sounds, and it sensitizes their brain to that concept.
Okay.
So you can read nursery rhymes. There's a million amazing books that rhyme. My favorites include Eric Carle, like The Brown Bear, What Do You See? The Llama Llama series by Anna Dewdney, and then Dr. Seuss. They're easy ways that you can build that skill in your kiddos. Even singing songs, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, Down by the Bay. I do that with my youngest. She's not 2 yet. And I leave off the last sound or the last word for her to fill in the blank. So it's never too early to start building those rhyming skills also with your
Oh, that's
kiddos.
so fun. Cruz, my youngest, he's 2.5, I guess, at this point. But we also sing Down by the Bay, and he calls it Mommy Song because he doesn't. He's like, "Can you
Oh,
sing it?" Like when I'm laying him down, he requests the song, and he's like, "Mommy Song, Mommy Song." And I don't do that where I have him fill in the last word, but I'm going to start doing that. But what he does is he picks whatever thing I'm going to sing about in the rhyming part of the song. Like he'll shark,
so
race
cute.
car, garbage truck, he'll like throw in
Oh,
whatever.
you have to rhyme.
So, I got to be on my toes to keep with the rhyming,
Yeah.
but I'm going to do that where I'll let him help me, fill it in as well, because that's not something we've done. So, great tip. Thank you.
Yep. That's an easy way to do it if you're already doing it. So, and then I think that if you have a kid that it's in school, you probably heard the word of sight words or high frequency
Hmm.
words. They're words that don't follow a pattern and can't always be sounded out. Words like of or was or the. These words must become a part of their reading vocabulary at a young age. So I actually encourage caretakers to help children learn these words before they enter kindergarten. You can introduce them 5 at a time to help kids master them and just keep reviewing them. And you don't have to just do flashcards. I think that's kind of an old fashioned way of doing things. There's apps now. There's a great app called Fry Words Ninja. And there's also a lot of ideas on Pinterest where you can write the word in chalk and then have them jump to the word that you said. And so that's just another great way to help kids build that success before they even enter school.
I love that. Thank you. Yeah, because I feel like that would be very helpful. We are homeschooling our kids right now, and I don't have a teacher background. So it's definitely been a learning
Right.
curve. And I know you've sent some of these tips along. And I've even noticed with my oldest with the spelling, like he can pick up that it's rhyming, but we're still working through like, well, if it's rhyming, it probably is going to end in the same couple letters. So you really could just change the first word. And so he can get that with some of the ways we do it with different like tiles of letters or whatever we're using. But when he goes to then spell it like on his own without anything visually being there, it's like kind of throws him off a little bit. But he can pick up that it rhymes. So we just,
Yeah, and there's another way you can talk to them about it. They're in the same family.
okay.
You can say that word's in the same family. They end this in the same way and they rhyme. But yeah, it's just one of those skills you keep building on as they understand more phonological awareness.
Yeah.
Another great tip, since are a big reader, is the book Bringing Up Book Monsters. Have you read it?
No, and it is on my TBR from you, but it is
Okay.
I've not
Okay.
picked it up
I've
yet.
already said that. It's one of those books that it basically shares everything I would want to tell a parent, but in fun ways because it's written by two parents who have their own kids. And then this book was given to me by a friend that has four children of her own. And I'm starting to give this book as gifts for people who are having babies because really if you lay that foundation that it's fun and that kids love books and love to read, it's just a lifelong gift you're giving them.
Yeah, and that's definitely a passion of mine is trying to ensure my kids are readers, but also with the show, right? And that it's family friendly. I mean, I know like our kids probably won't listen to the show, but that encouraging families to read along the spectrum. So,
Exactly, the lifelong gift you're giving.
yeah, so thank you for sharing that. And listeners, I'll be having all of those tips, the apps and the book. I'll have that all in the show notes. So you'll have that there. So you don't need to worry about scrambling to write it down right now. So, do you have anything else you want to add about the reading specialist endorsement?
I think that's it. I'm just so excited that I got to share part of my passion as not just a reader myself, but helping kids read. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Of course, I'm so excited for you that you're going through this. Can I ask how long does it take?
Well, I already had the master's in elementary reading,
Okay.
so I was just 2 courses short. So I have taken one, I need one more, but in the meantime, just because I find it so fun and fascinating and I'm on a slow path having my daughter still home with me, I am going to take just a couple more courses to also a lot of it has changed since I was a teacher
Sure.
and educate myself and be up to date on everything. So I really only needed 2 more courses, but I also have to become recertified since I've been staying at home and not being a teacher for since I became a mom.
Yeah, that's one thing I've heard about from our fellow military spouses. I think as we move around state to state, if we're licensed, being a teacher is a really hard one to transfer as you're moving around. I feel in my, pre-podcast days
Mm-hmm.
as a physical therapist that we had a national exam, so it was fairly easy to transfer my license as long as I was in good standing in the previous state. It was pretty easy, but I
Yeah.
feel for my teacher friends because it sounds like that's a really challenging road as you move around.
It's tricky too because when you move, it's usually the summer. So
Mm-hmm.
when you're moving in the summer, it's not like you can just pop into a new duty station or a new state or a new country like we've lived and get a job quickly as a teacher as well. And people who do it, I'm amazed and inspired by, but it took me the long path to get there and feel like I'm ready to try again. And so I'm excited for what the future holds.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. You're doing it. I'm very
Yo,
excited
thank
for
you so
you.
much.
Well, let's jump back to you a little bit in your reading life. So, what type of books do you like to read?
I've always been in a book club. So a lot of the times I'm just reading what the book club is recommending. I'm a big fan of Reese Witherspoon's choices. And
Mm.
I have a special aunt. I know you had your aunt on recently.
Yeah.
I have a special aunt that gives me a stack of books because she is such a quick reader and an avid reader herself. So I have by my nightstand about 10 books from my Aunt Chris that I need to read. And she always has great recommendations. But if I were to just go out and pick a book, I tend to go with historical fiction. I
Okay.
love World War II. Living in Europe, I got really passionate about reading World War II historical fiction. And I also dabble a bit in self help. I love Brene Brown and
Hmm.
um, I do a lot. I don't know if you heard of Blinksist, but it's an
No.
app that my husband shared with me, and you can do nonfiction and memoirs, and they give you it and they call Blink. So in about 10 minutes, you can
Oh,
get the key points of a book.
okay.
So I've been doing quick little, my last one I loved was called the 5 a.m. Club that was recommended by a friend as well.
Okay.
And so that's how I get kind of both sides of, okay, nonfiction and self-help and inspirational books, and then just the reading for leisure.
Yeah, and I know from what I remember, I think Eric was a pretty big reader as well, right?
but I feel like he cheats because he does those blinklists and then he'll say, I said that's kind of cheating. I mean, now that I'm doing it myself, I love it. But yeah, he's definitely more of a read on his phone, and I can't do that. I have to have I either am Audible or reading the hardcover book.
Yeah, I'm the same. We're about to go stay in one hotel room with our kids for the next 2 days, and I'm like, that's the only time I literally ever read on like the iPad or my phone a book, because when the lights have to go out at 7:30, we're stuck in the dark,
Right,
and I'm like, okay, well, I
right.
can read on the iPad, but other than that, that's reserved for only that.
That's smart. Oh, I like how you do that.
So, well, let's jump into our book flight a little bit about Kristin Hannah. So, we're calling this a vertical book flight because we're just going to focus on Kristin Hannah today. So, I'm
Yay.
very excited. Let's go ahead and talk about your first book we'll be sampling today.
Okay, so I, without a doubt, thought we should have to start our Kristin Hannah book flight with The Nightingale. It's her most famous book, and it's won a lot of critical acclaim. It's an international bestseller. It's sold over 4.5 million copies, but it's with good reason that it's so wildly popular. It's my favorite book of hers. And although I read it several years ago, it's one of those books that just sticks with you. And I feel like I can remember the story as vividly as if I had just read it last week, because it's this heart-wrenching, compelling story. It's about two sisters, and it follows their life, starting at the beginning of World War II. They both are living in Nazi occupied France. But what I really love about this book is that it offers a unique perspective of the war by sharing the perspective of women, and women,
Mm-hmm.
their stories are often overlooked and untold in World War II, and they were just as much heroes in their own right, but usually behind the scenes.
Yeah, this is
And
actually my all time favorite book. I'm going to go out on that limb. This is number one for me. I love this book.
I had no idea. I'm so excited to hear that because I feel the same way. It's one of my favorite books of all time, but I didn't realize it was yours. That's so exciting.
Yeah, I think this book made me feel a whole range of emotions, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I think this book you have to have a box of tissues sitting next
Hmm.
to you, and it's a long book, but it's one of those books that's really hard to put down because you want to know what happens
Agreed.
next. And I love the core of the book. While there's a war and it talks about the atrocities and the brutality of World War II, there's a love story of sisters
Hmm.
who are very different characters. Isabel, it ends up being, a spy and doing really amazing things. And I don't want to give it away,
Yeah.
but she's young and she's headstrong and she's rebellious. And then she has the contrast of Vienne, who's a mom and has a daughter and is living in the countryside of France. They both do amazing things that can change the course of history. And as I was prepping for this podcast, I didn't realize that Kristin Hannah was inspired by true stories when she wrote this book.
I didn't know that either, but it makes it even better.
I know. And so it makes you want to go down a rabbit hole researching because both characters, parts of them are true stories. She said she was researching for a different book called Winter's Garden. So she was researching World War II and came across this story of a Belgian woman who helped downed airmen to safe zones. And she thought, someone needs to write a story about this.
Hmm.
And she waited, and no one did. And that's what I love about Kristin Hannah is she knew this story needed to be told and needed to be in the limelight. And I just feel like this is one of those books you can't come away from without feeling change and learning. And it's so emotional. It's so riveting. And that it's true that both of these stories, Vienne ends up hiding and protecting Jewish children, and that's also based on true stories.
Wow. Yeah, you're bringing it all back for me. It's actually been a few years since I've read it, but this is the one and only book that I actually have kept on my shelves. because normally I just give books away, which I've said in previous episodes, because I won't reread them. But I'm like, I know there'll be a time and a place, and I will reread this because it is my favorite. So,
I know, I know. I feel like I want to go back and reread it again, or even maybe doing it as an audiobook. And then the exciting thing is they're making a movie out of this book.
oh,
I think it's been in the works for several years and then COVID
okay.
happened, but the main characters are going to be sisters Elle and Dakota Fanning. So
Oh, I didn't know
hopefully,
that.
hopefully soon.
I was secretly hoping we lived in Washington State 2 years ago. I was secretly hoping that I didn't know Kristin Hannah was from there.
Uh-huh.
So, and I was like secretly hoping maybe she would do some book event, but unfortunately we lived there in 2020, 21, 2020 and 2021. So not a lot of book events were happening, but I was like, she lives here. Maybe she'll do something. And then the world didn't really open up.
I was gonna say we should find her and do a girls' weekend and fangirl over her and find a place where she is and just go there.
Seriously, I'm down. All right. Well, anything else you want to add about that one?
Well, I think that if you have read The Nightingale and that's your only Kristen Hannah book, I would definitely encourage you to try out some of these other ones because what I love that this book, if you haven't read Kristen Hannah, will get you hooked on her.
Mm-hmm.
The way that she develops characters is so beautiful, but at the same time, she's telling these tragic and these stories of people living through unimaginable situations. But that's definitely her writing style. It's kind of a hallmark of how she writes her books. So she develops these characters that you feel like you actually know them and care about them.
And I think she does a great job too of immersing you in the place. Like, you just kind of feel like you've jumped literally into that story and you're in the
Right.
timeline. I think she does a great job with that in her writing.
And I love too that she doesn't just stay in one period of history. She's written about the 70s, she's written about the Great Depression, which I'm going to talk about both of those,
Mm-hmm.
but she does that in every book.
Yeah.
And that's just a really magical way that she writes, I think.
And to think about all the research that she does in the background to be able to do that, right? Like I'm sure you can't have firsthand knowledge of all of these, right? So you're doing a lot of research and digging
Yes.
down the rabbit hole, and wow, and just how she synthesizes all that to in a story is really beautiful.
She said she was a lawyer first, so that makes a lot of sense. She comes at it from
Oh,
that angle.
okay.
But yeah, she said books will take her years to research to she said she doesn't write a book until she knows beginning, middle, end, which I
Okay.
think is fascinating as well. So she has the whole story in her mind before she even starts it.
You can tell. I feel like you can, when I sit here and think about that, I'm like, you can tell in her writing that it just flows so well like that.
Hmm. Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so that was The Nightingale. So what's the second book by Kristin Hannah we'll be sampling today?
The second book is called The Great Alone. And I did this as an audiobook with my husband, actually. And it's set mostly in Alaska. It's in the wilderness mostly, following a family who decides to move from the Pacific Northwest during the 70s. And then the book takes place in the 80s as well. But the main character is named Lenny. She is 13 years old when the book begins, and it's a coming of age story in a way. And it's also a story about living in a dangerous place in Alaska where her family's settling a home and then in a dangerous family. So she has this
Mm-hmm.
juxtaposition for Lenny's life. Like I'm in this scary place of Alaska where there's bears and there's horrible winters. And then she has a dad who has mental illness. So
Mm-hmm.
this is definitely a book that if you have triggers for mental illness, I would not recommend it, but it has beautiful descriptions of Alaska and then also a beautiful bond between Lenny and her mother and shows the strength of women and what women can do together and separately. One of the quotes that I think is so cool from this book is that people are either running to something or running from something. So I would definitely recommend this book if you like outdoor adventures. My husband was into it,
I
surprisingly.
was going to ask that.
Yeah, he liked it a lot, and he'll say, "Well, I haven't read The Nightingale. I've only done." we did the grade alone together, and I said,
Yeah.
well, you'll have to go back and do that on your own. But it's a lot about too the American frontier spirit, which is a cool vibe, I think, for a book.
Hmm.
So not necessarily just for females. And on Audible, I love the narrator that does this book.
Okay.
She actually is a very famous, I think, narrator. So if you like her voice, you can it's a really easy one to just, you know, binge if you like to do Audible books.
Yeah, that's a great point about like audiobooks. I know people have asked me like, how do you find the ones you like? You know, some didn't work for me, and I'm like, if you know you like a narrator, you can literally search by the narrator that you like, and then you can find other books they've read and see if
Yeah,
they
and I
work
didn't
for
realize
you.
that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny because as I have really gotten into Audible, it just so happens this narrator is the same one for several that I like. And she actually wrote a book herself. Her name is
Oh.
Julia Whalen.
Oh, I love Julia Whalen. Yeah.
Yeah, that's who does the Great Alone. So,
Okay.
and she's funny. She changes her voices for the characters, which I think is so fun. Some people can pull it off, and some people can't.
Yeah.
And she, I think, does a great job with
Oh, and I didn't know she had written a book either. I'll have to look into that myself.
it. And then so my last Kristin Hannah book I wanted to chat about is The Four Winds. It's her
Okay.
most recent book. I think it came out in 20 or 21.
Okay.
And again, we're completely switching times and places. Um, it depicts what life was like during the Great Depression and gives a voice to what Kristin Hannah herself calls the greatest generation of Americans, which for you and I think those were our grandparents.
Hmm.
That generation is slowly, we're losing them. And so I love that this story gives voice to that time in American history.
Yeah.
It's set in Texas,
Okay.
which I didn't know anything about. It's called the Dust Bowl, which was a period of like severe storms that damaged agriculture of the prairies in America.
Okay. I've definitely remember that from history class, but no details. So reading
Yeah.
it in this form of a book would probably be a really good connection for me.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Again, a strong female character who she's a bit unusual. Her name is Elsa. And when the book begins, she is in her early to mid 20s, still living at home with her mom and dad, her family, I should say. They're a rich, wealthy family, well to do, and not nice to Elsa because Elsa doesn't fit that you're a beautiful Texas
A belle.
expectation of woman.
Yeah.
Exactly. So she's not really wanted by her family, and she knows it.
Oh.
And she has an experience. I'm not going to give it away, but it completely changes her life. And there's some Italian family involved in there. So I actually think that they talk about some Italian food in the book.
Fun.
But yeah, it's definitely one of those American historical stories that I don't think a lot of people are that well versed on, but it has themes of hope, strength of the American spirit, the bravery of women, and again, she's a very strong female character that ends up having another mother-daughter relationship come to light in the book. And so, yeah, that's my last one. But the same thing is going on in all of her stories where you just fall in love with these characters and you want to know what happens to them, and you don't want it to end. And again, this is a book very emotional.
Okay.
Probably will need your tissues nearby. I'm like, I don't know if she wants everyone to cry in her books, but I definitely do several times in all of her books when I'm reading them.
Yeah, to me though that's a sign of a good book is it's evoking enough emotion in me and I'm invested that much in the story that I'm feeling that and I to me that takes off like in a good book category. I don't have to cry for it to be a good book, but it does I know I'm really invested then.
Yes, absolutely. And that's for sure. I think all three books, I would be surprised if, you didn't have some emotional connection. And sometimes you just need a different outlet to cry.
Yeah.
And those are an easy, healthy way to do that and experience the emotions. So
That sounds really interesting. It has been on my list. It is one of hers I have not read, so I definitely need to pick that one up. It would be interesting to know, because I feel like, we talked about how she does a lot with mother-daughter relationships. It'd be
Mhm.
interesting to know in Kristin Hannah's life if maybe she had, maybe she's representing maybe her mom and her relationship. I don't know. I don't know that, but it would be interesting to know since she does a lot of that in
Yeah.
her writing.
I do know her mom was the reason she started writing books,
Okay.
and her mom passed away while she was still a lawyer, I believe. And so her mom said, "Well, what book are you going to write for me?" And so
Okay.
that could definitely be a motivation for her. I don't know if she's a mother herself. I do know, going back to The Great Alone, that her family lived in Alaska during that era of her life being a teenager. So I think she definitely, in a way, intersperses her personal life.
Okay. Yeah. Because I'm sure you draw from your experiences to be able to write these books as well. So,
I would think so, right?
yeah. Well, thank you so much. So, we did this Kristin Hannah book flight. And so, we talked about The Nightingale, The Great Alone, and The Four Winds. So, from me, I'd like to give you a little thank you and give you a dessert pairing for being on the show. I hadn't read any other of Kristin Hannah's backlist, so I went through my list of books that I've read and was trying to determine what would be similar that would pair well with this book flight. And I actually ended up choosing Snowflower and the Secret Fan by Lisa C. Have you read that one?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Okay. Have you read any of Lisa C?
I don't think so.
I think we might have just, if I can't remember if you were still living in Sicily with our book club when we read, oh my goodness, it's about the women that dove in Korea and they would fish.
Oh, wow.
Did
No.
you read that book?
No,
Okay. Maybe you had already left by that point,
probably.
but we definitely read it in our book club that we were both a part of.
Okay.
But I couldn't remember if you were still in the window when it was there. But Lisa C this book I'm actually recommending came out in like the early 2010s, I think. Um, but I think you'll really enjoy it. And I think she does a great job, like Kristin Hannah, where she really immerses you in the place and you really get to know the characters. So, this book in particular, Snowflower and the Secret Fan, takes place in China during the 19th century. So, in this time period, young girls were paired with a friend, like an emotional connection, and that was known as a Lao Tong. And this match, our main character actually is Lily. And the match, she's 7 at the time when we meet her, and her match is with an older woman named Snowflower. So, shortly after this match is made, she knows of this match. Snowflower sends her a fan. And back then, women developed a secret language to communicate with one another called Nushu. And I apologize if I'm not saying these names correctly. I read this as a hard copy book. Um, but they developed a secret language so they could talk secretly and so the men wouldn't know, right? And they were watched pretty closely
Hmm.
in the 19th century by their men, and they were kind of, isolated as women. And so, how their relationship ends up developing is they write lines of poetry, short songs to one another, and they write it in this secret Nishu language along the blades of this fan. So these are easy things they can pass amongst one another, or on handkerchiefs, things that they could pass amongst one another when they're seeing each other out in public or a social event. They can easily pass this, and no one will understand that they're actually communicating through this mechanism. So it spans the life of these two women and this communication, which I think is just so cool. It's based
Yeah.
off, like this really happened and this is what they were doing.
Mhm.
Um, there are some very harsh topics in here. They do talk about the foot binding
Oh,
procedures that
wow.
were done to women, because it was seen as a thing of beauty, was to keep their feet very small, and it does get a bit harsh talking about that, because of the obvious complications that can happen with foot binding, with the breaking of the bones and just the infections. But they're able to share their isolation together and communicate and have a friendship there was arranged marriages
Mm-hmm.
at this point in 19th century China. So they talk about the loneliness of that. They talk about their marriages. And so it allows them to have this friendship progress that probably would not have been able to
Right.
without this secret language to communicate. And why I chose this for this Kristin Hannah book flight is she does a great job of immersing you where you really feel like you're dropped into 19th century China and you're living right alongside of these women. So again, kind of along the same vein of Kristin Hannah, where there's going to be some tough topics, there's beautiful points, there's hope, there's joy. So you're going to feel the range of emotions
Right.
when you read this book. So I thought it would be a great pairing to go along with our flight today.
It definitely sounds like it. And I love that it gives a different perspective of China, which I don't have that much. I visited China when we,
Yeah, I figured with your
yeah.
connection, having lived overseas, it also in
Yes,
Japan
yes.
that you and Okinawa that you would have. I knew China's close, but I'm like, my other book option was Italy, but I think this fits better with our flight. So
Love it. I love it. I'll put it on my TBR.
yes, and let me know when you get to it, and I'd love to hear what you think.
Thank you. Okay.
All right, so let's finish up today with our bonus pairings, which are just a speed round of questions, so you can answer these pretty quick.
Okay.
So, our first question is, where is your favorite place to read?
Without a doubt, my favorite place to read is on the beach at my in-laws' cabin on Lake Michigan. It's one of those places that I know I can sit on the beach and be uninterrupted, and I will be relaxed and get a suntan and hear my kids playing along the beach. But for some reason, devour books there. I definitely, that's where the one place I know, okay, I can bring a bunch of books and I'll probably get to at least one. And it's also just my favorite place in the world out of all the places I visited.
Yeah, I feel like I've heard you guys talk about this place. Like, I have in my mind's eye a picture of it from
Yeah.
seeing your photos and hearing you guys talk about it, even though I've never been there.
Yeah, it's a little slice of paradise, definitely off the grid. The nearest grocery store is an hour away. So you have to
Wow.
prepare yourself for that. But yeah, it's just one of those places where I truly get to relax. And I think as a mom in this season of life, that's a rare, beautiful place. So
Yeah, I could see where that'd be a great memory.
yeah, yes, yes, definitely.
All right. And then what is one book that you have read that has changed your life?
Well, I'm going to echo your first guest, Alex, and agree with her about the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I think also because it's one of my most recent books I read during COVID and in a time that was a really tough time for everyone. But it's her memoir and it's very moving. It also, I love how she questions some of those societal constraints put on us as women. And it just has really great messages, inspiring messages, live your own life, live life by your own terms and by your own boundaries. And it's one of those books that have highlighted. It's one of those books that I keep and I kind of go back to. Sometimes I'll share quotes with friends, or it also led to me discovering her podcast. I don't know if you have dabbled in her podcast, but she has
No, I
a
haven't.
We Can Do Hard Things podcast. So
Okay.
if you like her book, this is another kind of avenue where she invites guests or she just talks with her wife or her sister.
Okay.
Yeah.
Really good to know. I actually find myself that I grabbed this book shortly after it came out. I couldn't believe it. We had this route, that we would walk past a little free library. Do you know
Yeah.
what those are? Where the people
Yes.
have it outside their house and they have the books. You can take it or leave it. And I couldn't believe it when I saw a hard copy, Untamed, on the shelf. So I grabbed it. So
You got it for free. That's
I
amazing.
got it for free. And it was shortly after the book had come out. Like, it was receiving a lot of acclaim. Like, I just couldn't believe it that it was on the shelf. So it felt like a gem for sure.
So either someone was like, I have to have someone else read this, or they didn't like it to put it in
True.
the free book library.
True. Well, hopefully it was someone just passing on the joy that they enjoyed it. All right. And then which do you prefer to read, audio or hard copy books?
Well, for right now in my season of life, I tend to do audiobooks because I can get through them more quickly. But in general, I definitely like the hard copies.
Nice. And then what are you reading next?
well, besides my textbooks for my next class, I really want to read a book by Emily Henry because
Oh, yeah.
she's really popular right now.
Hmm.
But I realized that she went to my college, the college that my husband and I went to, Hope College.
Oh, so fun.
And so I have not read any of her books, but she's all over the place in social media. And I think she's on the Reese book clubs. And so I think the one that I want to read of hers is People We Meet on Vacation.
Yeah.
And one of
Yeah.
them is being turned into a movie as well. I'll have to look and see which one it is. Because I always like to read a book. If I know a movie is coming out, I read the book first.
Absolutely. Yeah, I read that one. It's very good. And I think
Okay.
it would be interspersed with your textbooks and the
Yes.
busyness of your school program. It's a nice, light, easy read. Like it's not going to take a lot for you to condense it, which is probably what you need
Yes.
as an escape.
It's exactly what I need. So I'm glad to hear that you would recommend that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. I know your time is precious and I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me. It was a really exciting and fun opportunity for me.
Thank you so much for listening to Ashley Terpstra and I in our discussion today on her Kristin Hannah book flight. We'd love to hear what other books you might pair with this book flight at bookishflights.com. That is also where you can find more information on today's flight and any other books that we talked about today. I want to inspire a community of readers. So whenever you share a post about what you are reading or what you are picking up next, especially if you have heard about the book on the show, please tag us. Follow us on Facebook or Instagram at Bookish Flights. This is a brand new show, so if you enjoyed it, please head over to Apple Podcasts and give the show a review. Your review not only helps me, but it also helps the show reach others. Make sure you are subscribed on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to make sure that you will not miss an episode. That's it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening. As Emma Thompson said, I think books are like people in the sense that they'll turn up in your life when you most need them. Cheers to you, dear readers. Until next time.